I don't know how to describe it other than like a demon type of sound.
But it's silhouetted, hulking, every bit of 5.5 feet wide, 13 to 14 foot tall, pitch black.
The one thing that ran through my mind when I had this encounter was I don't have a big enough gun.
Your host, two-time witness and field researcher for more than 40 years, William Jevning. Welcome to Creek Devil.
Okay, everybody, we have Matt joining us, and John's with me. For some reason, I wasn't able to merge Tracy and Forrest on, so when I'm done with this piece, I'll bring those two on, and we'll do a piece with those guys. But so, Matt, what do you have for us?
Well, I wanted to talk to you again because, first time I was a guest of yours. It was a lot of fun. And just seeing you the other day reminded me of that. And we haven't talked since my last cryptozoology book came out. That was Books and Beasts in 2022 from Hangar 1. And I thought you'd be interested because it is a unique book. It is a book of 400 book reviews. Based on my 50 years of reading cryptozoology, trying to sort out what may be useful for the new and experienced cryptozoologists to track down and read. So much of cryptozoology is based on stuff that appears and disappears on the internet. Books pin it down a little better, and good books are invaluable.
Very true.
That is true. Well, tell us about your book.
Well, again, it's called Books and Beasts, a Cryptozoologist Library. And I wrote it because there was I wanted something like that. There are a couple of good websites that archive cryptozoology-related media, but nobody had ever collected a book or book reviews. So I took about 12 months and off other writing and reread stuff, pulled out old reviews, asked for recommendations from all the cryptozoologists I knew, what was new and notable. I looked at the best of the year lists from people like Lauren Coleman, and while I missed a couple that I should have included, I think I've provided something very good, very useful for cryptozoology readers. It is split into 4 sections. The first is, it opens with an essay on what cryptozoology is and the basic library, the things you're after, like habitats and such. And then I have the main section is on books on cryptozoology. And I'm talking physical cryptozoology here. The other kind is just outside my particular interests. So then I tried to do a few things that were valuable and unique. One is I included a big section on books for the lay reader, written on the science that a cryptozoologist has to know. There's key books on paleontology, evolution, the environment, zoology itself, and so forth. And I included a section on cryptofiction, some of the better-known novels, and a lot of kind of an odds and ends section for things I didn't know where to put elsewhere. So I looked at things basically that were published in English in the last 100 years and were of interest to those pursuing physical cryptozoology with an emphasis on being scientific.
Very good. Sounds very interesting.
It was fun. It wasn't cheap.
So this is all a compendium of different cryptids from around the world. Just in general, or does it focus more on the North American cryptids, or how did you structure that?
I tried to read books covering cryptids all over the world. Obviously, there is a glut on Bigfoot and the Loch Ness Monster, and I those way down because you could do a whole book of book reviews on the volumes written about them.
Sure.
But I tried to find books written on cryptids of Asia and Africa and South America and so forth that aren't covered as much to go along with the ones on North America and the oceans.
Yeah, that sounds fascinating. That sounds like a really... What's the name of the book again, just for everybody?
Of Books and Beasts, a cryptozoologist library. That's from my friends at Hangar 1, Bill and Alex Hijack.
So with respect to Bigfoot, did you have any really interesting findings that maybe were obscure that you pulled out that you hadn't heard before?
Let me think about that a second. Obviously, I included book reviews of the famous ones. You know, the books by Sanderson, by Coleman, and Jeff. Help me out.
Jeff Meldrum?
Yes.
Yeah, Jeff Meldrum.
His book.
Will Jevning, of course.
Yes. Brian Sykes' book on genetics. I tried to find some that were perhaps less overlooked. Some of the classics from the 50s, like The Sherpa and the Snowman by Charles Stoner. And the ones I could find that recorded scientific papers, Marjorie Halpern, for example, was an editor of a book in 1980 called Man-Like Monsters on Trial, which collected papers from a 1978 university symposium on Sasquatch. So I tried to collect those along with. I should mention there is one big book of Bigfoot books. Danny Perez wrote Big Footprints, which is a very helpful collection of Bigfoot media, although it's a little old now.
You know, I wished I could remember the author's name. There was a book that I picked up a few years ago. He was a journalist in the 1950s, and he was concerned with the Yeti and actually went to the Himalayas and actually tracked one of the creatures through a series of villages until he actually came on two of the creatures. Very, very interesting book. Yeah, it was John something. I can't remember the guy's name. All my books are in storage currently, so I don't have them at hand. But I'll try to remember it and get that information to you. It's a very interesting book what he wrote. So
there's Graham Hoyland's book on Yeti from a few years ago. What else have I got on Yeti? I've got it's a couple of ones, the originals from the 50s, a couple of books on the Chinese, Yeren.
The Yeren, yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Of course, and then, Bindernagel and Napier and the other classics that you basically have to read as a foundation for the field.
Yeah, John Green's stuff is
and
probably...
like Nickel.
Yeah, John Green's is probably...
He's hard to read. Nickel's hard to read.
Well, some of them are.
Some of his skeptical opinions, I really just find that he's stretching to find an explanation for something that seems more unrealistic than just, what's straightforward and in front of people.
Well, some people are debunkers rather than skeptics.
Yeah, that's true.
If I had to bet, I would bet that there's not a Bigfoot. Not because people are lying, because I know a lot of them aren't, but just because having, this 800-pound ape with zero fossil trail, zero bodies, etc., just seems more and more unlikely as the years go on. There are people who, yes, go too far in skepticism. I criticized Joe Nickel, for example, for he has a drawing of the Patterson Gimlin suit where he notes an interface between the suit and glove that he drew in. And no matter what books and photos I look at, I can't see it. I don't know where he got it. Yes, skeptics can go on.
I think it's always good to start from a skeptical standpoint of view and rule things out before you start to really take the other things seriously. With the Patterson Gimlin film, just, I've gone back and forth on that. Nobody can say for sure whether it was a guy in a suit or whether it was the real thing except the people that were there. And the only one who's alive that was there was Gimlin. And to this day, as far as I know, he has never said it was a hoax, but that it was a real creature. And you look at the way that the muscles can ripple and so on, and they just didn't have that sort of ability to have a suit that would cling to the body like that and have those kinds of muscles. But then at the same time, it just doesn't seem to act like an animal, right? I mean, if an animal were startled and it would run up, we know these creatures to be very fast runners, and it would run away very quickly, and then you hear the other part of the story, which they will say, well, it's trying to take them away from some youngling Bigfoots. But it just doesn't act like what you would expect a wild animal to act like either. So I go back and forth on that one, but it's always good to be skeptical from the beginning.
Yes. And I include a couple of the books on, that have a lot of coverage of the Patterson Gimlin case. Again, I would bet on a hoax just because of the lack of other evidence.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know Mr. Gimlin, and I don't call a man a liar unless I know him. But I can't quite get myself to believing there's such a creature and don't have any evidence.
Well, John and I are both eyewitnesses.
Yeah. I was just going to ask, have you ever had any experiences? But both Will and I have actually had eyewitness experiences, or I probably would be like you and wouldn't believe in it either.
Will told me last time about his. It was pretty impressive, and I just don't. Sitting here in my living room, all I can say is I don't know what you saw.
Right. Yeah.
John, I don't think...
You have to suppose, if you're looking at Bigfoot, I think what you said to begin with is a good foundation statement, which is that there's no fossil record of such an animal, and you would think that such a large animal would be discovered with all of our modern technology and everything. But I think in modern times, people just don't go out in the woods like they used to. And some of these very remote, inaccessible areas, we live in cities, at least I do, live in a city, and you don't have any comprehension of the vastness of some of the wilderness that's out there and how difficult it is to get back in to some of these places where sightings happen. And then you have to almost be expecting a sighting to occur to be able to have a cell phone out and take a picture. Otherwise, these things are gone, or you're running the other direction, most likely.
I wish we could have had Forrest on here because she could have addressed the fossil record thing. We've talked with her about that before.
Sure is that.
Forrest is our anthropologist.
Yeah, and she's very knowledgeable about a lot of the pre-human ancestors, and that, if I were a betting man, as you said earlier, I would put my money on that, we have how many species of dogs and cats and, rodents around with very similar but different, but the same species. Why is there only one species of human?
Yeah.
We know that in the very recent past there were other species of proto-humans or human-like creatures that lived, and the fossils are just, hard to find. I mean, very little of the fossils that exist out there are ever found, and especially if they were relatively recent. So we know that they existed, and if I had to put my money on what Bigfoot is, having seen one, I would say it's some sort of a human predecessor that was thought to be extinct or maybe just completely undiscovered, but it's very intelligent and elusive and nocturnal, and people just don't go into the woods like they used to. We have trail cams out there, but these things are smart.
Yeah, the fossil record is very spotty when it comes to the primate record. Very spotty. I mean, and then to your point there, John, about the forest. There's a lot of people out, especially Facebook and elsewhere, that claim they're out in the woods doing this stuff. And for the past almost 53, it'll be 53 years in December that I've been doing this. And I spent a lot of time on the whole West Coast, out in the mountains. I mean, thousands of hours a year. And I can only count maybe once or twice that I've seen other people out actually looking for the creatures. They say this stuff, but I don't see it. So I think a lot of it's just, I think it's baloney they're putting out.
And that's hard to sift through. You got to sift through the garbage to get to the real stuff. Many times people aren't looking for them, and that's when they see them. They're taking a little walking the nature trail, and they're surprised that they see something. So, yeah, there's a lot of garbage out there, and that's what makes it so challenging, is that you have to be able to sift through all the baloney to find the small kernels of truth that exist out there where people really had experiences. And there definitely is some evidence. Will got some really good evidence. I don't know if he's shared it with you, but he's got some really good footprint evidence and some scat and things like that he's shown me that I don't have an answer for.
I'll give you an example. You talk about people who are out and just they have this experience. David Boozer, who's a website developer and coach, he called me yesterday, and I hadn't talked to David before. Well, he actually built my website, WilliamJevning.com, and then Tom did some further work on it later. But I hadn't talked to David in a while, and he sent me a message. He says, "Can I call you?" So I said, of course. And apparently his 20-year-old son was with a friend hunting yesterday, and they had one charge them. I think he said 4 separate times, and it got within 10 feet of him, and he was so scared, his son, that he couldn't talk. He was up all night in his room, and then so David related to me what little he told him, and then the next day we talked again, and he told me more details when his son had calmed down. But his son said he'll never go in the woods again.
Yeah.
And then, on the other hand, you have to ask what the people who are in the woods all the time, wildlife biologists, forest managers, they get sick.
Well, that's not true. That's not true.
Yeah, we know about that stuff. That's where I find it interesting, because I always had that question, too. And Will Jevning schooled me on this. Go ahead, Will.
Well, I can give you one example of many. I know someone who, in fact, they just retired from the Forest Service up near Mount Hood, and this person had an encounter, and a fairly close one, and contacted me. We talked about it on the phone, and they related to me that all of their coworkers knew about this stuff and were scared to death. They didn't know how to deal with it, and they were afraid to be out in the forest. So some offices you'll go to, and oftentimes they're young people working in there, and they may not even be permanent employees. That are kind of the face to the public, and they won't talk about it because they don't know anything. The people that have been there longer, in many cases, will know about it, but they won't talk to the public about it. You have to kind of, it's sort of like with, the Indian tribes. I've got friends in a number of different tribes between, New Mexico and Alaska. And until you sort of become friends with people and earn their trust, they won't talk about this stuff, but when they do, it's prolific. Not just their the tribal history, but the personal accounts. When we went to the Navajo Reservation a year ago this month, we talked to a lot of people there, and almost every single person told us they'd seen one at least once.
And Will, correct me if I'm wrong, but was there not a U.S. Forest Service or something back in the 1970s, early in the 1970s, when they listed the animals that lived in, I think, Northern California or Washington State, maybe it was, had actually listed Sasquatch as one of the creatures that lived in the woods there as an actual animal.
That was supposed to be...
I talked to the service. They said somebody stuck that in as a joke.
Yeah, right. That was actually an Army document, so...
yeah, there's an Army document, too, the Army Corps of Engineers.
Right. But now I'll tell you, I know Army officers that have seen written records about these things. One captain told me he saw 1,100 records before they destroyed the paper records, but I'm pretty sure the Army doesn't throw anything away. So, and I know.
Well, you're right there. I was military, and I will agree that if there were government records, they are somewhere.
Oh, yeah.
Now, nobody can tell me, and we're way off the topic of the book here, so I want to steer back there after this, but nobody can tell me why they could cover up, something that would be world famous and bring scientists and tourists from all over the world.
Well, I can answer that, but I'm not going to bring it up. I'm not ready to.
Yeah,
I'm not ready.
Maybe I'll take a stab at it. Will's much more knowledgeable about that than I am, but I asked the same question, and I think you think a lot like I do because I ask these questions too. And the best explanation I've heard, whether this is a true explanation or not, is that they do know about it, but these things are supposedly cannibalistic, and there are a number of missing persons that disappear in the woods every year, and that the speculation is that these creatures are part of why people are disappearing and turning up dead or partially eaten or just completely disappearing. And if the government knew about this for this many years and kept it a secret, and then it suddenly came out that they've known about it, there could be lawsuits and all kinds of other problems. So it's just better to keep it under wraps and take care of it with private contractors. And I don't know if Will wants to get into this or not, but
that's a whole
that they have to take care of this sort of thing.
That's a whole can of worms we can discuss another time.
But can of worms, yeah.
but trust me.
Get back to books for a second.
Yeah.
One of the things, the fact that you lack the physical evidence of most of the major cryptids is one of the reasons that I included a section on fiction, because well-written fiction often provides very interesting speculation. When serious authors try to think about, where it is, where they found it, and so forth, you get some very interesting novels. I just finished Hominid by R.D. Brady, which is very good. There's quite a number of Max's evolution about Sasquatches.
A friend of mine bought that book for me. There's another one called Frontier. It's about Lewis and Clark, and it's sort of it's a fascinating book.
That might be the best, single Bigfoot novel.
Written after all this time. I do want to mention something that you said about evidence, and this is it's a misrepresentation that most people use when they say there's no such thing as evidence. And I didn't quite know how to address that until a friend of mine who's a retired judge, and he's a pretty tough character. He's Sicilian from New York, and we used to joke with him about, the possible mob connections and things like that. And he'd always joke about it. It wasn't real, of course, but being a judge, he told me, here, in reference to the Patterson film, for example, he says, people need to look at the federal rules of evidence and to see what is and what is not evidence. So he said, if something like the Patterson film were to ever go to court, he said, it's a slam dunk because you have two eyewitnesses that were credible, you have a film, photographic evidence, and you have physical evidence in the form of footprints. He said, if that were to go to court, there isn't anybody who could argue that because of those three pieces of evidence. And people all the time saying, well, that's not evidence. Well, they're full of baloney because it is evidence.
Well, but science is a different deal. The evidence required for Bigfoot is exactly the same evidence required for a new species of mouse. It's typecast, a physical type study.
Well, people want to drag one in on a slab. And in reality,
I actually was trained in the sciences myself. I was a chemist, and now I'm in medicine. And what you said is correct. Proving something scientifically is different than, a judge or a jury saying it's evidence in terms of law. But, in the lack of the science. So, for instance, someone may find a hair sample and send it in for DNA analysis, or a blood sample and send it in for DNA analysis, and it may come back human. But it might be so close, this creature may be so close to human that it doesn't differentiate enough to where you can tell. You know what I'm saying?
I can address that too.
You know, a footprint looks just like our footprint, but it's a little wider and a little bit larger, so people could say, well, that might not be a real footprint, but it still is some form of evidence. And a lot of animal tracks, or, you know, we track animals with footprints through the woods all the time, and don't suppose that someone's hoaxing deer tracks when we're hunting a deer, right?
I can address.
So there are forms of evidence that you could consider, but yeah, your point is valid that scientific proving evidence is not up to that standard.
See, I can address.
If there is evidence, I think they probably haven't come out with it.
Yeah, I can address the DNA thing because, again, you know, I know a lot of police that have seen the things, and there was one incident. Remember, John, our friend TW, that's a police chief in Texas.
Yep.
And there was an incident, and I can't remember how many years ago now. A few years ago, 4 or 5 years ago. There was a 15-year-old boy in the town of Las Cruces, New Mexico. And I lived in Las Cruces a year, and there's not many streetlights there because the sky is so clear at night that the locals want to see the stars instead of having a lot of residual light. So they kind of keep the lights to a minimum there on just where safety places are. So this kid stayed at his friend's house too late, and he was riding his bike home in the dark, and he had the feeling he was being followed. So he stopped under the first street light he came to and turned around, and here was this massive creature behind him. He said it was on all fours, and it was 6 feet high, even on all fours. So he went to take off really fast. The creature reached out, grabbed his bike. He went flying over the handlebars and run like crazy to his house. When he gets home, he's hysterical, of course, and they called 911. So a deputy sheriff came out, and the deputy was kind of skeptical, and the kid says, "Hey, I'll take you out and show you." So they went out to the location. Well, they find the kid's bike 15 feet up in a pecan tree. And my buddy that's a police chief lived in Las Cruces at the time, so he went with the deputy. They were friends, and they pulled the bike out of the tree. Well, the deputy was on duty, so now we have a chain of custody situation going here. So the deputy collected, there was a little bit of blood on the bike. Apparently, it cut its hand bending the bike frame or whatever, but he collected some of the blood, and he sent it to one of their crime labs, I think in El Paso, and they called it the $20 test. It was just to run it through CODIS to see if somebody was in the system, if it was a person, right? So nothing came back, and nothing came out. Now, a year later, TW told me that the deputy was called into the sheriff's office one day, and the sheriff was kind of heated about this because he demanded why the sheriff's department was paying for a $60,000+ full spectrum DNA test. He said, that's not what I put it in for. But what it came back was simply unknown primate. Now, I talked to a DNA expert at the University of, I think it was Edmonton, when I was writing my first book, and I said, I don't want to talk Bigfoot. I want readers to understand how DNA works. And we talked about that. And everybody thinks DNA is the magic bullet. Well, it's not. It depends on what's in there on a particular species. And if there's nothing in there, you send an unknown sample in, the DNA is only going to come up to the nearest thing related to whatever that is. So in this case, it was unknown primate. There was nothing else in there. So it wouldn't come back Bigfoot or something like that.
Right. There's no control sample that we can compare it to.
Exactly.
It's just unknown. And another interesting form of evidence.
Sorry.
Yes, go ahead.
Now, the sheriff confiscated that report, by the way. The sheriff confiscated that report, by the way. Oh, I just said the sheriff. Oh, no. The sheriff confiscated that report and fired the deputy. And nothing's been heard of it since.
And nobody filed a FOIA.
Nope.
Public record.
Oh, I'm sure they destroyed the records. It's happened before. I was contacted, and I'll give you another example. I was contacted by a detective north of Seattle here a number of years ago. And at the time, he was working in an office that was shared by I believe it was the Forest Service. So they got a call. First, the detective got the call, and apparently a hiker in the North Cascades was confronted by one of the creatures, and it bared its teeth at her within a couple of feet, scared the living daylights out of her, and then they handed the report over to the Forest Service. So the detective asked his friend, that got the report handed to him. They said it was a Forest Service matter since it was on Forest Service land. He said, "Let me know what you find out about that." So a little time went by, a week or so, and he asked him. He says, "Well, what did you find anything out about that?" And the Forest Service employee wouldn't even talk to him. He says, "Don't ask me about that." And he got really kind of unfriendly about it. And so he said, "Well," and now there was a 911 call involved in that. 911 records are not supposed to be erased. And he heard the 911 call.
In the back window.
Yeah,
My Australian cattle dog
So this
thinks that other dogs are not allowed to walk on the street.
this detective, he heard the 911 call, but it vanished from the records after this. So when people think that things can't vanish in this topic, they do.
Yeah. And that bicycle situation that you're speaking of, Will, I mean, that was a pretty powerful form of evidence, and it's just too bad that we can't get transcripts of that, because that would be sort of a magic bullet. But I'll even give you another type of evidence that a lot of people don't consider, because people think it's so easy to hoax vocal sounds, and I have a lot of expertise in audiology because of some of my background as well. You hear these clowns going through the woods hooting and hollering, and people. So that's how people are picking up on these Bigfoot calls. But they are actually, so there's equipment that can do power transformation on the vocal performance of the sounds that come out of recordings. And you have equipment that you put it into, and it'll show, here's the first harmonic frequency, the second harmonic frequency, and it'll give it to you in hertz. And most living animals have multiple harmonics that their voice is capable of making, and then harmonics that they're not capable of making. And they catalog all these harmonic frequencies for all of the different known animals, wolves and humans and so on, and they can't make certain frequencies.
Well,
and there are recordings of Bigfoot howlings out there, and I've looked at the power structures on the harmonic frequencies, and there's no known animal that can make them.
I'll give you.
They're closer to a lion roaring than anything else.
I'll give you a first-hand example of that.
Yes.
When we were on the Navajo reservation last year, we got, or Don, our Navajo friend who invited us up there, got a text message from up in northern Arizona. And so the Navajo reservation is huge. And it was up near Flagstaff, so we drove from Window Rock to Flagstaff. It was about a 2-hour drive. And it was, I don't know what time we went, around 10 o'clock at night. They said there was one up there screaming bloody murder. So I said, well, we should probably get some audio, for all the evidence we're collecting. So we drove up there, waited around about an hour, didn't hear anything. So we had kind of a big day the next day, so I wanted to get an early start, so we drove the 2 hours back. So now we're 5 hours invested into getting some audio of one screaming. We get back to Window Rock, which is the capital of the Navajo Reservation. Not a very big town, it's very small. And I went upstairs to my room, because we were staying at the hotel, and I get a text from Don and Adam, who are downstairs. They said, come outside right now. So I'm walking across my room to the door, and I hear this howling blasting through the wall of the room. It was that loud. And it was coming from 1,000 yards away on the mesa across the highway. And we recorded that for more than an hour. And Adam, we decided to make of the footage we collected there a 10-part television series, which Adam is just fine-tuning now. It's almost completed. But he sent 60 seconds of it to Thinker Thunker. And I don't know if you've seen his stuff on YouTube, but he does that, the visual spectral analysis of different sounds and things. He's very good at it. So he did a 15-minute piece on that, and it clearly shows. And he did a number of wolves and things like that that were native to that area. and I think the Mexican gray wolf was the number one suspect, but it was nothing like that.
Yeah. Yeah, and it is not even close. If you think about it, the vocal cords are what actually close to make sound vibrations, and then you have to have a powerful set of lungs to make it project. So you have to have a big chest cavity, and you have to have very large vocal cords to get some of these very low-frequency sounds. And some of them are inaudible to human ears. I mean, you hear about the infrasounds that certain animals can make to paralyze other animals for attack and so on. And some of these sound spectra have these ultra-low frequencies that there's just nothing big enough capable to make those frequencies. So it's unknown animal. You can't point to say it's Bigfoot, but it doesn't match anything that we know of. We can at least say that.
Thinker Thunker, actually, he was nice enough to let us use his piece in the first episode of the show's called Bigfoot Navajo Nation. But and I don't know when it's going to be released or anything yet. We're not quite there yet. But yeah, I mean, it was... and the locals, the Indians were telling us, they said, oh, yeah, that thing comes down every 2 or 3 days and gives the town hell, then it wanders back off. But, they were very matter-of-fact about it. In fact, while we were there were people revving engines and honking horns trying to get it to shut up. But the locals were...
When you get in, when you look at the books here, and I think I certainly read all the bestsellers, and then I tried to go back through and get some of the less known ones and see what was really good. For example, there's one called Raincoat Sasquatch. I forget the name.
Yeah, Rob Alley. I know Rob.
Right. But if you look at at who's doing books or who's doing significant sections discussing books, you don't get virtually any qualified biological scientists. You get, there's Milgram and there's a few others, but very, very few. And it's very strange that if you have evidence of what would be the biggest discovery in zoology in probably 300 years, you can't get a single biological scientist to pump for it. You have people, Renee.
Esteban Sarmiento is one. Yeah.
Oh, I have.
You have, Esteban Sarmiento is one. John Benernagel, the deceased wildlife biologist, is another. But a lot of them are doing it in secret. They have suspicion that this may be real, but they don't want to. Don't want to sacrifice their academic credentials.
I get a lot of
public and say this.
I get a lot of people contacting me that are scientists asking me stuff because, they don't know how to approach it. And, I have, besides Forrest, I have another anthropologist who actually Meldrum was trying to get John to do work for him. And John's a pretty tough guy. He worked the court systems he's a forensic anthropologist. He worked the court systems in San Francisco for many years and taught there. I don't know which university he taught at, but he contacted me. It was funny. When he first contacted me, probably 10 years ago, he said, I listen to your stuff, and you're probably the best person out there. He says, I would show finding Bigfoot to my students as an example of bad anthropology, bad science.
It's not science at all.
It's
probably something they designed to try to discredit Bigfoot, if anything.
But I've got a number of biologists that have contacted me, and they're wanting, they run stuff by me because they have no idea. So, there's a lot of these scientists. I mean, this isn't something you're just going to pick up your forensic kit bag and go out in the woods and deal with. It's not that easy. I've done it for almost 53 years, and I'm probably the farthest of anyone in terms of evidence collection, but just because of the sheer difficulty of it. I mean,
sure.
And
if you consider that they're probably a nocturnal creature for the most part, that right there makes it difficult in and of itself.
Well, I told David with his son, for instance, when he was hunting and it was just approaching dusk, I said that's the time they start hunting. In fact, I pointed out to the guys, 2-3 years ago in Southern Oregon, I had done a bunch of study of deer behavior. And, I grew up hunting, but I wasn't that familiar with their specific behaviors, when it comes to bedding and feeding and things like that. So I found probably the number one person in the world who has researched that and did some studying. So when we went to the field near the Three Sisters Wilderness, I told the guys, I said, okay, that area is where deer are going to be coming down out of their bedding areas. And it was like clockwork. Within seconds, here come 3 deer that popped out of the brush. And it couldn't have been any better. And I said, now the creatures are going to be hunting these deer on their way into their feeding areas. And sure enough, we started hearing these sounds where the creatures were coordinating movements, which is very similar to how chimps hunt. And the only problem was it was a bigger net that was being made around this feeding area than I anticipated. So we left the area quickly and we drove adjacent about a mile, thinking we'd be outside the area and we could observe this and record. And we weren't quite far enough away because one made a vocal just outside the vehicle, maybe 30 feet away from us. And Tom and I were, it was one of those kind of underwear changing moments because we had our windows down and we weren't expecting something that close. But, some of these things are predictable.
I talked to people like Cliff Brackman and...
those guys are worthless.
I talked to quite a bit. I talked to, most of the people. That's not what I'm talking about. Aside from that, I talked to a lot of the best known people, and I listened, and some of them, like Renee, said they just haven't seen anything that convinced them.
Well, I'll tell you, some of those people have no idea what they're doing either.
Like Cliff says, well, let's assume you have 1% as many Bigfoots as you have black bears, and you very rarely find black bears. Mm-hmm. And, that's absolutely true. But you do find them. Cliff found one himself. Oh, I see. I have areas where I see bear every single time I go there. You have to know what you're doing. See, how you have this for so long?
A lot of these
who've been out there more than anybody.
Well, a lot of these people. See, now here's something I'm going to bring up too. My forensic anthropologist friend John, he made a good point in a couple of the recordings we did. He said, there are a lot of places, and one of these places actually is near Humboldt University in Northern California. He says, oftentimes, now this is a guy that, testifies to courts for years, so he knows all this stuff. Oftentimes there are human bones that are found, like a single bone, and, he said, simply put, they're not going to put the resources into finding whoever that belonged to. So they go to repositories, and he says, potential Bigfoot bones could resemble human bones and might be judged as such if they're found. So they would go to repositories. He said there might be all kinds of Bigfoot bones in these places. And I know that from working archaeology.
Yeah, again, I apologize for interrupting. That's certainly true with some bones. If you get a femur of a Sasquatch or you get a skull or a partial skull, can't be taken for a human being.
But you're probably not going to find them.
Giant bones, supposedly, that were dug up in Indian mounds across the country back in the late 1800s. I don't know what to make of that, but you do read about it.
You're talking about newspaper hoaxes from 100 years ago.
Yeah, I don't know because I haven't done the research, but I've heard people speak of these things, and I don't know.
And it's
you can't dig up an Indian burial these days.
And you're not going to find them typically just falling down dead someplace. They're not a dumb animal. They may bury their own dead.
And we find burials eventually.
Washed out. Not necessarily.
But
I'll tell you.
You would think so. Yeah, but the forest really decomposes things pretty quickly. I mean, within a week, a lot of these forests will completely decompose an animal to the point where it's unrecognizable.
I was thinking...
circling back to your book on a compendium of cryptids, one of the first books I read about cryptids was In Search of Prehistoric Survivors by Carl Schucker. And it caught my attention because he was taking it from prehistoric animals that we knew about from the fossil record and applying it to cryptids that have been supposedly seen in different areas. And you could point to an area like central Congo in Africa and say Mokele and Mbembe, where there have been sightings since the 1700s, and it's a very dense, dangerous area. Nobody goes there. They don't have any kinds of modern technology, and there's supposedly this small sauropod dinosaur that lives there, and there's very little evidence of it. But when you say something like that to someone and they go, oh, that's the deepest heart of dark Africa, of course there could be anything there, or the deep ocean, where we know less than 1% of the deep oceans, could there be a sea serpent? The problem I think a lot of people have when they think about Bigfoot is it's in the United States of America, and we're a very civilized country. And I think that's part of where it becomes tricky to believe unless you've seen one. If I hadn't seen one, I wouldn't believe in it either. Because, you're right. You can't point to DNA evidence. We don't have a body. But I've seen one, and I have a scientific background of BS in chemistry, practice medicine, and I can tell you, I wasn't being hoaxed. It was terrifying. If you don't see it and you think about it in those terms, you say it's less likely to find a cryptid here than in South America's Amazon jungle or the heart of Africa or some of these more primitive countries where they don't have our technology. And I agree with that.
Well, you wouldn't.
I agree with that.
You wouldn't believe how remote some of the areas are in this country, though.
Yeah, that's true.
You get away from the coastal areas. Holy cow!
To close that on that myth, I have no reason to think you're not telling the absolute truth. So all I can say is I don't know.
Yeah.
I can say that there's no other animal. There's certainly no large mammal where we have a good idea of its range and lots of sightings, and no one can find it. And even when you go out to rare mammals in the lower 48, grizzly bears and wolverines, we still get very clear trail cams. We still find bones, and so forth. So you're going to have to bring one in, guys.
Well, I'll tell you one thing. They're a lot smarter than a grizzly bear and a lot smarter than a regular wild animal. If you're taking it from the assumption that it's an ape, then that's, you could probably make that statement and be right. But if you're taking it from the assumption that it's a wild human predecessor, and I'm not an expert on these types of things, but I've heard, Forrest talk about the Denisovians and all these different types of humans that existed side by side with us up until very recent times. They have to have human-like intelligence, or maybe even more intelligence than us, especially in the woods. And they may be able to keep themselves concealed, especially if they're fairly rare and people just aren't going back into these areas. That's the only comment I would make, is that it's a different beast when you're talking about something that's human-like intelligence versus a bear.
And the avoidance of humans. They will go out of their way to avoid people. And there are other predators that do that. Most predators, in fact, will go out of their way to avoid humans. But now in the trail cam thing, it's like other primates. Almost all primates, they're intimately aware of their surroundings in their own home area. And this has been written, there are a number of articles about this by scientists where primates will go out of their way to avoid human-made objects in their area. So it's not surprising that they're not on trail cams because, you stick them up on a tree, they're easily spotted, and, it just doesn't surprise me at all they would avoid that.
Well, if I was writing a novel, and I wanted to make it as believable as possible that there was a Sasquatch and we hadn't found it, yeah, I would go with a human ancestor. I'd go with a population of a couple of thousand scattered over the Pacific Northwest with maybe some little relative populations elsewhere. Because you have to assume that, you'd have to assume that, it's impossible to have a continental range and not be found. So yeah, if I was trying to come up with something as plausible as possible, that's about what I would come up with.
Fellas,
there are authors, J.M. Bailey's Deep Trilogy is very good. Brady's very good. Several other authors have done, I think, a really good job in fiction. And I'd be curious to, if you don't have an actual Bigfoot, I'd be curious to see you write one.
Fellas, I hate to interrupt this, but we're just about out of time. So, any final thoughts here before we wrap up?
I got one question for the guest. If you had to take any cryptid across the world that you would believe would be the one that's real, what would it be?
Orang Pendek, Malaysia.
Mm-hmm.
Very interesting.
Yep. That's been decided by government.
I would probably go there.
Okay.
The number 2 would be the yard, the marsupial tiger of Queensland.
Oh, the Tasmanian tiger, yeah. The Palestine.
Now, the Queensland tiger is possible surviving thylacoleo cat-like predator.
Yeah.
All right, fellas. Well, Matt, thank you for joining us. We appreciate it. Everybody watch for his book. And what was the name of your book again?
Okay, it's Books and Beasts. It's from Hangar 1. You can get it everywhere. And I'm very interested to hear from everybody. I've generally liked the reviews so far. I want to hear them good and bad.
All right. Well,
I'm
thanks.
going to check it out.
Thanks, Matt and John. And everybody, come visit us again.
Thanks, Matt. Very interesting discussion.
Yeah, this was cool. Let's do it again.
Thanks for listening to this episode of Creek Devil. If you or anyone you know has had an encounter with these creatures, please contact us at williamjevning@yahoo.com. That's William, Jevning, @yahoo.com. All communication is confidential. Join us for another program next week. And until then, keep your eyes open out there.